Thank you for inviting me back to Tokyo and Japan. This is my second time, and every time I get to experience new things here. And over the last few days, I visited many organizations that are doing Scrum, and over the 2 years, I've definitely seen some improvements, and it's all thanks to you. Okay. But now I'm going to talk about the current state of Scrum throughout the world and some of the trends that I'm seeing as I travel around the world visiting different organizations. I'm lucky enough to head an organization that has people in many different countries using Scrum and applying it in many different fields. And just to remind everybody, Scrum.org is an organization founded by Ken Schwaber, the co-creator of Scrum, with a mission to help people and teams solve complex problems. So though we're called Scrum.org, our mission is not about Scrum, it's about the outcomes that Scrum creates. And that's perhaps the most important thing we learn about Scrum, that it's about the outcomes of delivering more value and doing it in a more humane way. But Scrum.org still is a lot about Scrum, and we do education through training, certification, and ongoing learning. I'd like to share some numbers with you about what's happening in the market as a whole. So in this ever-changing world, we continue to see over 1.1 million cert holders. Some of you might be in this room. Interestingly, we have more cert holders in more countries than the UN actually recognizes, which is great, which continues to reinforce the importance of having a way of approaching complex problems throughout the world. We have 344 trainers in 52 countries. And over the last year, we've added one more Japanese-speaking trainer who you're going to hopefully spend some time with today, John. But let's talk a little bit about some of the most interesting things that have happened over the year. So I live in the United States of America, and every day we wake up to another crisis or surprise. If I was working in the White House, I definitely would be using Scrum, but I do think they'd have a lot of trouble defining a product goal at times. Add to this uncertainty and change is the emergence over the last year or 2 years since I've been here of AI. AI is making many organizations challenge how they work and how they're staffed and how they align to problems. So to add to the political uncertainty and turmoil in the world, we also have a technology that might be as revolutionary as the printing press. May we live in interesting times. But this level of uncertainty and continuous change is just an acceleration of previous ages around the internet and other technologies. Scrum is all about creating stability in a very unstable environment. But it's not alone in this approach. Lean startup and design thinking also, and other approaches, also approach complexity and provide an approach to dealing with uncertainty. So we know how to deal with this level of uncertainty and change, but we don't do it. I've been working with Scrum for over 20 years, and it continues to be the model that I see in many organizations. We do Scrum, but we plan once a year. We do Scrum, but because of our definition of ready, we only work on work that we really understand. And we do Scrum, but we don't release very often. I coined the term Water Scrum Full when I was an analyst at Forrester 17 years ago. And I challenge all of you to look at your processes to solve the Water Scrum Full problem. But it isn't all your fault. There's many things that stop Scrum from really growing in enterprises. And maybe some of these resonate to the challenges that you're having every day in the companies you work for. The first one is the disconnect between business and technology. This is quite severe in the Japanese market from what I observed. Every company is a technology company today. Technology then needs to be integrated with the business to effectively work at the speed that the environment requires. The second one is bureaucracy and hierarchy, a characteristic of most human organizations, unfortunately. I even see this in my son's school with the way in which the 3 tables in the canteen, where the cool kids sit on one, the medium kids sit on another, and the not so popular nerds sit on the third. And it seems that organizations are just big high schools at times, where power, authority, status, and coolness become a key commodity. Scrum encourages empowered teams and flat network-type organizations. Sometimes they don't exist. The last characteristic is risk-averse. It's much easier in a company not to do stuff than actually to do stuff. It's much easier to not release something that you're not quite certain adds the value and then talk about it a lot than to release it. Scrum is all about learning, and it's hard to learn if you avoid doing anything. So considering this, considering the reality of the world that we live in, considering the challenges, when will we start seeing the norm of the world be the norm of how our organizations are organized? And that brings me to the first area, enterprise agility. So at its heart, Scrum is really simple. And its most successful, it's very, very simple. A clearly defined problem, an acceptance that the solution will change as we learn more about it, and empowered teams that can make real decisions. It's not surprising that all the first Scrum case studies are actually born in a crisis situation. However, there are other models that actually also lend themselves to Scrum. Innovation, new companies, small companies, and product-oriented companies. And that's what we are seeing in terms of enterprises today, the move to a product operating model. We see organizations grouping their digital capabilities into a series of products and then managing them in the same way as any software or digital company would manage their product. And there are many characteristics to this change that I'm not going to bore you with now. But it's more than just creating a new role called product manager. It requires a fundamental shift of mindset, how you align, and how you invest. The mindset is perhaps the most important thing and something that many organizations can quickly think about. But thinking about the capabilities in terms of the customer, the boundary, and the investment. But the best way of getting the mindset is to align your teams to those outcomes that you seek. And the best way of getting that alignment is to get the finance people to invest in that way. So as my grandma would say, the golden rule is the guy with the gold sets the rules. The agile product operating model is emerging as a pattern for us defining the principles for the movement to this product-oriented approach. And though we're not going to be talking about that in detail, this trend of product is becoming incredibly important to Scrum adoptions around the world. But in the same way as Water Scrum Fall seems to still be plaguing us, we still see organizations adopting product to fit into a model like this. This 2x2 illustrates the general way in which we classify organizations that are embarking on this mission. Ideally, we'd be in the top right, with empowered teams that have a clear ownership of their products and an organization that supports that. The reality is, unfortunately, majority of organizations are still in the bottom left. So how do we move these organizations? Incrementally, one product at a time. And we do that connecting it to business value and outcomes in environments where the business really sees the value of moving to this approach. If you can't measure it and it isn't going to add value, then there's no point in changing it. I think some of the impact of product and some of the reason why people are moving to product organizations is also being driven by the second trend, AI. As anybody in this room that's experimented with LLMs, you'll discover that context is king. How many people have been using an LLM maybe to create a new recipe for breakfast, and then forget that and start asking it questions about work and find the answers are very peculiar? My wife says that ChatGPT has got a much better memory than me and remembers what she asked it before, unlike me. She might be right. AI requires good context, and product might provide that. But we all know that AI is changing the world. Perhaps the most obvious is ask a computer science graduate from this year in the US market. It's easier to get a job with a fine arts degree than a computer science degree in the US at the moment, because organizations are wrestling with what is the impact of AI on IT. So we could be all depressed and worried about our jobs, or we could think a little bit differently. Jeff Sutherland, the other co-creator of Scrum, talks a lot about increased productivity, hypervelocity. I'm not a big fan of words like hypervelocity, but Jeff and I do agree that augmented teams will deliver a lot more value. Kent Beck, a little less overstated than Jeff Sutherland, describes it really about how teams are breaking work down in a more effective way. So the A in AI perhaps needs to be a different word. I don't know how this translates, but augmented rather than artificial intelligence. Because I believe that teams that effectively use AI will be more successful and actually still present in organizations rather than people that don't. But we're at a Scrum event, so the questions that I'm interested in about AI are two. One, will we still have product teams, or will it be individuals that deliver products? Do we need teams? And as I still have very expensive children, is Scrum still useful? Let's talk about those two. Will we still have product teams? Well, obviously I asked AI, and even AI said that we will still have product teams. When talking to AI, which is very strange to say, when talking to AI, it really exploited the idea that humans use products, and human decision-making, human empathy, human nuance is still going to be required to build amazing products, even when we've got AI. It did, however, say that who knows what's going to happen in 5 years. However, product development is about choice. It's about understanding experiences. It's about really understanding the humans that are using your products. And today, the best things to do that are human beings. However, those teams are probably going to be much smaller and more focused. So let's now talk a little bit about Scrum. Obviously, I am biased. However, the three parts of Scrum that are super important still seem to be valid. Empirical process control. If anybody's used an LLM model, they've realized that it's a process of continuous refinement based on experience. Empowered teams. I'm actually really excited about this. For the first time, we really can build cross-functional teams. We experienced this at scrum.org. We're building a new online learning platform at the moment. The problem when you're building these platforms is you have to talk to lawyers. And lawyers take a long time to give you decisions. Now with LLMs, we've managed to not include lawyers until the last sprint. It's so great to have a lawyer on my team that doesn't charge by the hour and actually gives us answers to questions, which was a surprise as well. The last element is continuous improvement. Think about how, when you're using AI, when you're augmenting your team with AI, you're in this continuous improvement loop. And it's very important to inspect that loop and that learning for governance, for model management, for context management, and ultimately prompt engineering. At scrum.org, we use AI all the time to help us in sprint planning, daily scrums, sprint reviews, retrospectives, and it has hugely influenced the increments we build and what our product backlogs look like. But it has had a huge impact on the two key accountabilities of product owner and scrum master. We recently published a new class that talks about product ownership and AI, harvesting these best practices that we see to be a better product owner, an augmented product owner. The biggest impact for me as a product owner is it's streamlined the amount of information that I have to look through and how I can use that information. I also see Scrum Masters as being a key augmented role on a Scrum team with AI. On the slide, I have some of the details of where the impacts will be, but I'll highlight something that's even more fundamental. The number one responsibility of a Scrum Master in Scrum is to improve, to enable the team to deliver more value. Effectiveness is a key responsibility of the Scrum Master, and AI is an amazing tool for improving team effectiveness. So Scrum Masters are going to be the AI change agents in organizations, and hopefully that's going to go better than Jira implementations. So AI is going to have an impact on Scrum teams, but you have to be ahead of the curve with the adoption. You are more relevant today than you were before AI, but only if you take advantage of it. So the future, though a little bit scary, is also very exciting. To go back to that high school analogy I used earlier, it's a bit like that first high school disco or prom. I can barely remember mine, but many of you are a bit younger. But I do remember the excitement and the opportunity that that big group of people provided for me. We're standing at the door and looking at AI and new product-aligned operating models in organizations, and we can jump in and create massive change. And I encourage all of you to take advantage of that in the same way as Ken did 30 years ago with Scrum. Thank you for your attention. And now we have a chance for a few questions, I think.
ありがとうございました。1点、ちょっと未来の話の質問があります。先ほど最後の方のスライドで、スクラムはスケーリングせずにスケールするっていうのは、私もすごい未来があるワクワクした話だなと思ったんですけど、実際に今見られている企業とか団体の中で、そういうスケールせずにスケーリングしていってるような組織が今世界のどっかにあったりするのか、それも含めて今から起こっていくことなのかっていうのを肌感をお聞きしたいです。
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And the short answer is yes. A lot of organizations, and usually it's not because they don't want to, it's because they can't afford to. So they've had to look at creative and imaginative ways to scale their product delivery without putting lots of people on it. I've always been very frustrated about Scrum in the large. Organizations seem to continuously break it as they scale it. It's a bit like the speed of light or other physical constraints. I think that Scrum, over 10 teams, over 10 people per team, doesn't necessarily work effectively. So instead of trying to work out how to scale it beyond those constraints, let's think about how we either use technology to not require us to scale, or think about how we break down problems so that we create decoupled organizations that don't have to scale. I think we've all learned a lot from Tesla and the way they manage dependencies, the way they manage scale. But we can do that without being as insane as Elon Musk, I hope. So be creative when you scale. And unfortunately, as human beings, we have some constraints. But the great thing about AI and product orientation allows us to scale without scaling. And luckily, many organizations, because of AI, aren't scaling anyway. So it's a surprising opportunity. Thank you for your question. It's a great question. Any more questions?
Hello. Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation, and I ask the crowd's indulgence in allowing me to pose the question in English since the speaker is a native English speaker.
Well, I wouldn't say native, I'm from Leicester, but yeah, okay. But thank you.
You talked about leveraging AI for the business, and I was wondering, one of your points was the disconnect between the business and the technology side. How can we use AI for bridging that gap?
That's a really interesting question. And I think the most important way that it helps us is AI is very good at showing our misunderstandings of things. And it presents that back to us very quickly. For instance, we were working on this new online learning platform, and we created, to use AI effectively, we had to create context that included who our customer was, what the problem we were solving. And as we were doing that, it became very evident that we as a team, and particularly Ken Schwaber, but I don't want to go there, didn't have a shared opinion of who our customer was, what the problem was we were solving. And so it really quickly made that very evident. It's so funny that a new technology like LLMs and generative AI is making us almost go back to structured approaches to thinking about problems, to provide that structure for the AI so it can help us solve those problems more effectively. So that's very long. So it really accelerates the inspection and adaptation of our understanding about the problem and creates a common connection between us, I think. And cynically, it also gives us an opportunity to use it as a catalyst to do the things we should have been doing before but didn't get away with doing. Nobody knows what the heck's going on with AI, so let's use that as an excuse to work with the business more closely and learn together. I hope that answered your question from my point of view, and thank you.
はい、AI の活用方法についてちょっと聞いてみたいことがございます。昨今AI エージェントを、いろんなタイプのモデルを作ってるかと思うんですけど、将来スクラムチームの中に、スクラムの開発者の1人や2人を AI エージェントで、スクラム運営するとか、場合によってはスクラムマスターが AI エージェントだとか、そういったことでとてもベロシティが高まるとか、そういった狙いを持ってエージェントを活用したような取り組みとかテストモデルとか、そういったことって考えたこととか実践されてるんでしょうかっていうのをちょっと不勉強ながらに聞いてみたいです。
That's an interesting question. So the short answer is we've just written a white paper on that actually, that talks about onboarding your AI agent to your Scrum team or your AI team member and the practices that you need to do that. It's an interesting thought experiment today, but what it does highlight is the fact that quickly you're going to get lots of specialized agents and it's going to become a huge amount of technical debt inside your own team. And unless you manage them in the same way that you manage every element of your product delivery lifecycle, they're only going to be as valuable as that documentation that you never look for. I am, however, interested on the relationship with agents and humans in teams. I think there's something there that will become more and more interesting. So as a team member, we're responsible for a set of agents that we work with to do our work. Of course, I'm talking not about boring process controls like creating burn down charts and things like that, where agents could definitely work today. I'm talking about the nuanced stuff like building a vision or creating clear outcomes or thinking a little bit about personas. Because I really still believe that will require a partnership between technology and human beings, at least for the next 5 years. But thank you for your great question. And thank you, everybody. And I'll be around for the rest of the day, so come and chat.